Before we begin, please be advised that this story contains mature themes and intense situations that some listeners may find disturbing. The stale scent of metal polish and old oil clung to Alex Miller's small locksmith shop, a comforting aroma that usually signaled routine predictability. But on that Tuesday afternoon, a package arrived that would unravel every thread of his carefully constructed reality. It wasn't a usual delivery from a supplier, nor a customer dropping off a broken lock. This was a plain, unmarked cardboard box, addressed only with his shop name, no return address, no sender. Alex, a man who dealt in the intricate details of security, found its anonymity unsettling. He cut the tape with a utility knife, the blade slicing through the brown paper with a soft hiss. Inside, nestled in a bed of shredded newspaper, was a single object. It was a key, but unlike any Alex had ever seen. It was old, undoubtedly antique, crafted from a dark, almost obsidian-like metal that gleamed faintly under the shop lights. The shaft was intricately carved with swirling, almost organic patterns that seemed to shift and writhe if you stared too long. The bow, the part you hold, was shaped like a coiled serpent, its tiny, unblinking eyes seemingly watching him. There were no teeth, no bitting, no cuts along the blade. Just a smooth, tapered end, polished to a mirror finish. It looked more like a piece of ancient jewelry than a functional tool. Alex picked it up. It felt heavy, surprisingly so, as if it contained a dense internal core. The metal was cool against his palm, almost cold, despite the warmth of the afternoon. He turned it over and over, examining every detail. He'd seen master keys, skeleton keys, even bump keys that could defeat certain pin tumbler locks, but this was different. This key lacked any of the mechanical features that would allow it to interact with the lock's internal mechanism. It was, by all logical accounts, utterly useless. Yet, a prickle of intuition, a gut feeling he couldn't quite explain, urged him to try it. He had a wall of old, discarded locks, a morbid collection of his past failures and triumphs, some dating back a century. His gaze fell upon an ornate brass padlock, a relic from an old Victorian chest he'd restored years ago. Its original key had long been lost, and all his attempts at picking or impressioning it had failed. It was a beautiful, stubborn piece of history. He walked over, the strange key feeling heavier with each step. He inserted the smooth, toothless blade into the keyhole. It slid in effortlessly, without the usual resistance or jiggling. He braced himself for nothing, for the key to simply spin freely or get stuck. But then he turned it. A soft, almost inaudible click echoed in the quiet shop. The padlock, which had resisted every expert hand for years, sprang open with a faint metallic whisper. Alex froze. His breath hitched. He stared at the open padlock, then at the key in his hand. He closed the padlock, a solid thud, and tried again. Insert, turn. Click. Open. Again. Click. Open. His mind reeled. It had to be a coincidence. A fluke. Perhaps the padlock had been on the verge of breaking anyway. Or maybe somehow it was a universal key for that specific type of antique lock, a rarity he'd never encountered. He was a locksmith, a man of empirical evidence, of gears and springs and precise measurements. Magic wasn't in his vocabulary. He had to test it again. He scanned his wall of locks, his heart beginning to pound a frantic rhythm against his ribs. His eyes landed on a modern high-security deadbolt, a commercial-grade lock from a prominent manufacturer, designed to thwart virtually all picking attempts. It was a 6-pin tumbler, hardened steel, with anti-drill plates and a restricted keyway. Impossible to open without its specific, laser-cut key. He walked to it, his hand trembling slightly. He inserted the smooth, featureless key into the complex keyway of the deadbolt. Again it slid in as if custom-made, no friction, no resistance. He turned it. The deadbolt mechanism engaged with a distinct, solid thunk. The bolt retracted. The lock was open. Alex pulled the key out, then pushed the deadbolt back into place, securing it. He tried again. Insert. Turn. Thunk. Open. He repeated it 5 times, his movements becoming more frantic, his disbelief warring with the undeniable reality unfolding before him. Each time the deadbolt yielded instantly. His hands were shaking now, a tremor that ran through his entire body. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. This wasn't a fluke. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a master key or a skeleton key. This was impossible. He staggered back, bumping into his workbench, scattering a handful of key blanks across the floor. He stared at the key, then at the open deadbolt. His mind raced, desperate to find a logical explanation. Was it magnetic? Did it generate some kind of frequency? Was it a sophisticated electronic device disguised as an antique? He examined it again closely. No batteries, no circuits, no discernible mechanism whatsoever. Just solid, cold metal. He snatched up a small heavy-duty padlock he used to secure his own tool chest. It was a robust little beast with a complex disc detainer mechanism, notoriously difficult to pick. He inserted the key. Turn. Click-clack. Open. He tried it on the shop's back door lock, a standard residential cylinder. Open. He tried it on the cash register drawer. Open. He even walked outside, his mind a blur, and tried it on the lock of his own beat-up sedan, a model notorious for its finicky door locks. It slid into the ignition, and with a turn the engine roared to life. He quickly turned it off, his heart hammering. This wasn't just a key that opened any lock. It was a key that opened every lock. The initial shock slowly began to morph into something else. A creeping dread. Alex, a man who made his living from the sanctity of locks, suddenly held something that rendered his entire profession, indeed the entire concept of secure containment, utterly meaningless. What would happen if this key fell into the wrong hands? What kind of chaos could it unleash? Every bank vault, every prison cell, every private home, every classified cabinet, all could be opened with this single innocuous-looking piece of metal. He became acutely aware of the silence in his shop, a silence that now felt heavy, charged with an unseen presence. He glanced nervously towards the street, then at the security camera monitor above his desk. Had anyone seen the package arrive? Had anyone been watching him? The anonymity of the delivery suddenly felt less like a quirky puzzle, and more like a deliberate act of concealment, a silent warning. Alex clutched the key tightly in his hand, its cold metal pressing into his palm. It felt like a burden, a terrifying responsibility thrust upon him without warning. He was just a locksmith, a man who fixed things, who made people feel safe. Now he held the ultimate tool of insecurity, a device that could tear down the very fabric of privacy and protection. He looked at his reflection in the polished surface of the key. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a horrifying wonder. He knew with an absolute certainty that chilled him to the bone, that his life, and perhaps the world he knew, had just irrevocably changed. The key had chosen him, and he had no idea why, or what it truly wanted him to unlock. But one thing was clear. He was no longer alone in knowing its existence. He could feel it, a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, a phantom gaze from beyond the walls of his shop. Someone else knew about the key, and they were watching. The air in Michael's shop, usually a comforting blend of metal, oil, and old wood, now felt thick with an unseen presence. The prickling sensation intensified, crawling up his spine, settling between his shoulder blades like a cold hand. He spun around, his eyes sweeping across the familiar shelves, the rows of glistening keys, the sturdy workbench littered with tools. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the back, the ticking of the antique clock above the door. He told himself it was exhaustion, a trick of the mind brought on by the sheer magnitude of what he'd discovered. But the feeling persisted, a relentless whisper of impending danger. He spent the rest of that night in a state of heightened alert, jumping at every creak of the old building, every gust of wind rattling the window panes. Sleep was a fleeting, uncomfortable specter. He kept the key in his pocket, its strange weight a constant reminder of both its power and the perilous secret he now carried. The following morning, the world outside seemed to have sharpened its edges. The usual friendly faces of early morning commuters seemed to hold a flicker of something he couldn't quite place. The mailman, a jovial man named Frank who always had a joke, gave him a curt nod that felt unusually distant. Michael dismissed it, attributing it to his own frayed nerves. He tried to go about his day as normal, unlocking the shop door, arranging the display of new security locks, the mundane rituals of his craft, but every movement felt scrutinized. He found himself glancing out the front window more often than usual, his gaze lingering on passing cars, on pedestrians who lingered a moment too long. He saw nothing overtly suspicious, no dark sedans parked across the street, no trench-coated figures lurking in alleys. Yet, the sense of being observed remained, a constant, low-frequency hum beneath the surface of his perception. The key was a silent, demanding companion. He tried to analyze it further under his magnifying lamp, tracing the intricate symbols etched into its shaft, feeling the peculiar coldness of its metal. It yielded no new secrets, only deepened the mystery. He considered taking it to a colleague, perhaps an expert in ancient metallurgy or cryptography, but the thought was immediately dismissed. How could he explain its existence? How could he trust anyone with a secret that could unravel the very fabric of reality, or at least his own? No, this burden was his alone. His usual lunch break, a quiet affair with a sandwich and a crossword puzzle, was now punctuated by restless pacing and repeated checks of the shop's perimeter. He found himself unconsciously reinforcing the locks on his back door, ensuring the old alarm system was armed even during the day, something he hadn't done in years. His paranoia was a tangible thing, a suffocating blanket that pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe normally. A chime above the door announced a customer. Michael instinctively tensed, his hand going to the key in his pocket. It was Mrs. Henderson, a sweet elderly woman who needed a spare key for her garden shed. Her familiar request, her gentle smile, were a welcome anchor in the swirling chaos of his mind. He cut her key, his hands moving with practiced ease, grateful for the momentary distraction of routine. But even as he handed her the new key, his eyes darted to the street outside, a habit already firmly entrenched. Later that afternoon, something shifted from a vague feeling to a concrete, unsettling detail. As he was tidying up the workbench, he noticed a faint, almost invisible scratch on the polished surface of his antique oak desk, where he usually kept his ledger. It was a thin line, no more than an inch long, but it hadn't been there yesterday. He was meticulous about his shop, especially the desk, a family heirloom. He ran his finger over it, a shiver tracing its path down his arm. It wasn't deep, barely breaking the surface, but it was new. Had he done it himself? He couldn't recall. He was always careful. He tried to rationalize it, perhaps a stray tool, but the scratch felt deliberate, a tiny, almost imperceptible message. He started checking things. Small things. The way the stack of invoices was aligned, the slight angle of a display stand, the precise position of a wrench he always left on the pegboard. For 2 days, nothing. He began to doubt himself again, blaming his overactive imagination. Then on the 3rd day he found it. The small, tarnished silver compass he kept on his desk, a trinket from his grandfather, was turned ever so slightly to the left. Just a fraction of an inch, but he knew its usual orientation. He always kept it pointing north, a habit he'd inherited. He hadn't touched it. Someone else had. His heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't paranoia. This was real. Someone had been in his shop, or at least had access to it, without leaving any other trace. They were ghost-like, silent, and terrifyingly subtle. The idea that someone could have entered and left his secure premises without tripping an alarm, without forcing a lock, was unthinkable. He was a locksmith, for crying out loud. He knew every trick, every weakness in every lock he installed. He spent the next few hours scrutinizing every inch of his shop, his home upstairs, his small storage shed in the back. He found nothing else disturbed, no forced entry, no broken windows. It was as if the intruder had simply walked in. He checked his own custom security system, a complex array of sensors and reinforced deadbolts. Everything was armed, everything intact. The only explanation was impossible: the key. Had someone else found a similar key? Or had they somehow learned of his key's power? The thought sent a cold dread through him. If someone knew about the key, and they could bypass his defenses with such ease, what else were they capable of? He clutched the key in his pocket, its cold metal a stark contrast to the burning fear in his gut. The scratch on the desk, the compass. They weren't just disturbances. They were warnings. A silent declaration that his sanctuary was compromised. He started taking the key with him everywhere, even when he went upstairs to sleep. He placed it under his pillow, its presence a strange comfort and a constant source of anxiety. He ate sparingly, his appetite gone, replaced by a gnawing worry. He researched ancient keys, legends of universal openers, but found only myths and fairy tales. Nothing that corroborated the terrifying reality in his hand. The internet, usually a vast ocean of information, offered no solace, only reinforced his isolation. One evening, as dusk settled, painting long shadows across the street, Michael was closing up shop. He locked the front door, double-checked the deadbolt, and pulled the blinds down. As he turned to activate the alarm, his gaze fell upon the glass of the door. There, pressed against the outer pane, was a small, almost translucent adhesive sticker. It was a tiny stylized symbol, a circle with a single upward-pointing arrow inside it. It looked innocuous, perhaps a child sticker or a discarded piece of promotional material, but Michael had never seen it before. He walked closer, his breath catching in his throat. He tried to peel it off from the inside, but it was firmly attached to the outside of the glass. He went out, his heart pounding, and carefully scraped it off with his fingernail. It was thin, almost like a decal. He held it up to the fading light, turning it over in his fingers. The symbol was simple, minimalist, but it struck him with an immediate, chilling familiarity. He had seen it before. Not on a key but in a book. An old, obscure text on ancient symbols and their meanings, tucked away in the deepest corner of his grandfather's forgotten library. He remembered seeing it years ago, dismissed as an esoteric oddity. The symbol, he recalled, was an ancient mark of passage. Not just any passage, but a specific one. It represented a gateway, a threshold, a point where one world intersected with another. More than that, it was often associated with secret societies, with those who guarded hidden knowledge or sought to acquire it. It was a sign, a deliberate, unmistakable sign. He looked up, scanning the street, the rooftops, the shadowy alleys. The streetlights flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows. He saw nothing, heard nothing but the distant hum of traffic. Yet he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the sticker was a message, a confirmation. They weren't just watching anymore. They were marking their territory. They were telling him they knew, and they were coming for the key. The air grew colder and the shadows seemed to deepen. No longer just a trick of the fading light, but a tangible presence. He was no longer just a locksmith with a secret. He was a target, and the game had just begun. Michael felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. It was the icy grip of fear, stark and undeniable. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing the sudden, terrifying realization that his quiet life had just shattered. He wasn't just observing the world through the lens of other people's locks anymore. He was now squarely in the crosshairs. He scrambled to the front of his shop, fumbling with the deadbolt, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped the heavy brass key. The clatter of the lock engaging sounded impossibly loud in the sudden silence. He double-checked the reinforced steel door, the barred windows, every security measure he had meticulously installed over the years. They were designed to keep people out, but what if these people were different? What if they knew how to bypass every defense he could imagine, or worse, use the very thing he possessed against him? His gaze fell back to the small, ornate key resting on his workbench. Its intricate design, the way it seemed to absorb and reflect the dim light, suddenly felt less like a family heirloom and more like a ticking time bomb. For years, it had been a quirky curiosity, a legend passed down from his grandfather, a story about a key that could open any lock. He dismissed it as a fanciful tale, a charming eccentricity. But the man in the trench coat, the whispers of an organization, the chilling certainty in that voice, it all pointed to something far more sinister. He remembered the first time he truly tested it. He was just a teenager, messing around in his grandfather's cluttered workshop. There was an old rusted strongbox that his grandfather had always claimed held the secrets of the universe, but had never been able to open. Michael, feeling a surge of rebellious curiosity, had picked up the strange key. It was heavier than it looked, perfectly balanced. He'd inserted it into the strongbox's ancient lock. There was no struggle, no jiggling, no resistance. It simply turned with a soft, almost imperceptible click. Inside, there was nothing but a faded, yellowed photograph of a stern-looking woman and a single perfectly preserved rose petal. His grandfather had just chuckled, saying, "Some locks are meant to be opened, Michael, and some secrets are meant to stay hidden." He'd never thought much of it since, accepting it as a fluke, a lucky alignment. But now the memory sent a shiver down his spine. The key didn't just open locks, it yielded them. It was as if the metal of the lock recognized the key, surrendering its secrets without a fight. If it could open that strongbox, what else could it open? Bank vaults? Government facilities? Digital encryption? The thought was staggering, terrifying. He had been sitting on a power that could shake the very foundations of security, and he hadn't even realized it. He paced his workshop, the rhythmic squeak of his worn shoes the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. Who were these people? The man in the trench coat spoke with an unnerving authority, a chilling certainty that implied vast resources and a ruthless agenda. The Order, he'd called them. A secret society? A cabal of powerful individuals seeking ultimate control? The possibilities were endless and equally horrifying. He stopped at his desk, his eyes scanning the chaotic array of tools, blueprints, and half-finished projects. He needed to think, to plan. But how do you plan against an enemy you don't even know? An enemy who knows you, knows your secret, and is clearly already in motion. His phone buzzed on the counter, making him jump. He snatched it up, his heart leaping into his throat. It was his sister, Emily. He almost didn't answer, his paranoia screaming at him to disconnect from the outside world. But Emily was family. He couldn't just vanish. "Hey, Em," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, to hide the tremor of fear that still vibrated through him. "Michael? You sound off. Everything okay?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Emily had always been perceptive, a trait he sometimes found endearing, sometimes exasperating. "Yeah, just a long day. Busy," he lied, glancing nervously around the shop, half expecting shadows to detach themselves from the corners and coalesce into menacing figures. "Well, I was just calling to see if you wanted to grab dinner tomorrow night. Mom's making her famous lasagna, and she wants to see you." A dinner invitation. A normal, mundane request. It felt like a lifeline, a connection to the world he still knew. The world where keys only opened doors and locks kept things safe. But it also felt like a vulnerability. Could these people target his family? The thought sent a fresh wave of ice through him. He couldn't put Emily or his mother in danger. I don't think I can make it," he said, trying to sound genuinely regretful. "Got a big job coming up, really swamped. Tell Mom I'll catch her next week." A beat of silence. "Michael, you always have time for Mom's lasagna. What's really going on?" Her voice was sharper now, less concerned, more suspicious. "Nothing, hein, Urili. Just work. I gotta go. Talk soon." He hung up before she could press him further, feeling a pang of guilt but also a surge of fierce protectiveness. He wouldn't let them get near his family. He stared at the phone, then at the key. He had to understand what he was up against, and more importantly, what the key truly was. His grandfather had always been a man of riddles and half-truths, but he'd also been fiercely protective of his family. Why would he have given Michael such a dangerous object without more warning? He moved to a dusty old filing cabinet in the back of the shop, one his grandfather had used for decades. It was locked, as always, with a complex, antique mechanism that Michael had never bothered to pick. He'd always assumed it held old invoices or forgotten blueprints. Now a new thought sparked. What if his grandfather had left him clues? He pulled out the ornate key. His hand trembled slightly as he inserted it into the heavy brass lock of the filing cabinet. The key slid in effortlessly, almost magnetically. He turned it. Again, no resistance, just that soft, almost reverent click. The drawer glided open smoothly, revealing not invoices, but a neatly organized stack of journals. The first journal was bound in faded leather, its pages brittle with age. He opened it to the first entry, dated over 70 years ago. The handwriting was his grandfather's, younger and more vigorous than he remembered. October 17, 1952, the entry began. "The key arrived today, just as Father described. My hands shake as I hold it. Feels alive. He warned me of its power, of the responsibility, but said it was our family's sacred duty to guard it. He spoke of the Order, a shadow that has pursued this instrument through generations, seeking to wield its ultimate power. They believe it can unlock not just physical barriers, but the very fabric of reality, the secrets of existence itself." Michael's breath hitched. The Order, the same name the man in the trench coat had used. His grandfather knew. He hadn't just given Michael a family heirloom. He had passed down a dangerous legacy, a burden of unimaginable weight. He flipped through the initial pages, his eyes scanning for more details. His grandfather had documented early tests of the key, describing how it effortlessly opened safes thought impenetrable, ancient chests, even a prototype cryptographic lock designed by a brilliant but paranoid inventor. The entries were filled with a mix of wonder and growing dread. Then an entry from 1968 caught his eye. "They found me. A man named Elias Thorne. He called himself a collector for the Order. He spoke of its true purpose beyond mere locks. He said it was a key to the nexus, capable of opening pathways to forgotten knowledge, to hidden dimensions, to literally anything one could imagine if wielded correctly. He offered me immense wealth, power, protection for my family if I would surrender it. I refused. I will never surrender it. It is too dangerous in their hands. Michael felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. Elias Thorne. The name resonated with an ancient, chilling power. A collector. This wasn't just about money or secrets. This was about something far grander, far more terrifying. A key to the nexus? Hidden dimensions? His grandfather hadn't been exaggerating. He'd been trying to prepare him. He continued reading, his heart pounding with each word. His grandfather had spent years in hiding, constantly moving, protecting the key. He developed a complex network of safe houses, dead drops, and coded messages, all designed to safeguard the key and its wielder from the order. He'd even hinted at a hidden failsafe, a final resort if the key ever fell into the wrong hands. But the details were vague, scattered across multiple entries, like pieces of a puzzle. Michael looked at the key in his hand, then back at the journal. His grandfather hadn't just been a simple locksmith. He had been a guardian, a warrior in a secret war Michael was only just discovering. And now that war was his. A sudden sharp rasping sound from the back door of his shop made him freeze. It wasn't the usual creak of an old building settling. It was deliberate, metallic, like someone was testing the lock. He quickly slammed the journal shut, shoving it back into the filing cabinet, and locked it with the ornate key. He gripped the key tightly in his palm, its smooth, cool metal now feeling like a weapon, or perhaps his only defense. The rasping stopped. A moment of terrifying silence, then a faint thump against the door, followed by the unmistakable sound of something heavy being dragged away. Had they tried to force entry? Or were they just sending a message? He crept towards the back door, his senses on high alert. He peered through the tiny peephole, his breath catching in his throat. The alleyway was empty, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of a distant street lamp. But on the ground, directly beneath the doorknob, lay a single perfectly preserved rose petal. The same kind of rose petal he'd found in his grandfather's strongbox all those years ago. It wasn't a warning. It was a declaration. They knew he had the key. They knew his family's history. And they weren't just coming for it. They were already here. His quiet life was irrevocably over. He was now a player in an ancient, dangerous game, and he had just found the first rule. Trust no one. And the first move was his. He had to run. The words echoed in his mind, a frantic, desperate mantra. He had to run. Trust no one. The quiet hum of his refrigerator, the soft tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, suddenly felt like a countdown. Every shadow in his familiar living room now seemed to harbor a threat, every creak of the old house a warning. They were already here. How long had they been watching? How much did they know? His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat urging him forward. He didn't think, he acted. His hands, surprisingly steady, moved with an instinct he didn't know he possessed. First, the journal. He snatched it from the coffee table, its worn leather cover feeling heavy, ominous. Then the key. It lay on the dark wood, glinting innocently, yet it was the catalyst for this nightmare. He pocketed both, the cold metal of the key pressing against his thigh, a constant, chilling reminder of his new reality. He grabbed his worn leather satchel, the one he used for work, and began stuffing essentials inside. His wallet, phone, a power bank, a small flashlight. Clothes? No time for a proper change. Just a hoodie, some dark jeans. He needed to be inconspicuous. His mind raced, calculating, planning. He couldn't go to Jessica. He couldn't go to David. Trust no one. That rule was absolute. Friends and family were liabilities, potential targets. He moved silently, a ghost in his own home. He peered through the blinds, his breath catching in his throat. Across the street, a dark sedan was parked, its engine off, windows tinted. It hadn't been there an hour ago. A knot of ice formed in his stomach. They weren't just coming. They were here. His gaze swept the street, the familiar suburban landscape now alien and menacing. A flicker of movement at the edge of his vision, a shadow detaching itself from the lamppost down the street. It was too far to make out details, but the intent felt palpable, a predator's silent approach. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but a cold, clear resolve solidified in its place. He wouldn't be a victim. Not yet. His grandfather hadn't been. He had fought, he had hidden, he had warned Michael. The back door. It led to a small, overgrown garden and then a narrow alleyway. It was his best bet. He crept through the house, each floorboard creaking like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. He reached the kitchen, the back door a dark rectangle against the fading light. He fumbled with the locks, his fingers clumsy with adrenaline. Unlocked. He paused, listening. Nothing. Only the frantic thumping of his own heart. He slipped out, closing the door as softly as possible. The cool evening air hit him, sharp and invigorating. He moved quickly, silently, through the dense bushes, his satchel bouncing against his side. The alleyway was dark, smelling of damp earth and forgotten things. He glanced back at his house, a final lingering look at the life he was leaving behind. The dark sedan still sat across the street, a sentinel of his past. He broke into a run, his footsteps muffled by the soft earth of the alley. Where was he going? He had no destination, only an urgent need for distance. He knew the city's underbelly, its forgotten paths, from years of wandering clearing his head. He merged with the shadows, a specter disappearing into the urban night. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his thumb hovering over the screen. Jessica. A text message. Hey, everything okay? You sounded off earlier. Call me when you can. He stared at it, a pang of guilt and longing twisting in his gut. He couldn't. Not now. Not if he truly couldn't trust anyone. What if her phone was compromised? What if they were listening? He muted the notifications, slipping the phone back into his pocket, a silent promise to himself that he would explain everything, if he made it out of this. He kept moving, his mind racing. The journal. He needed to understand what was inside it, what his grandfather had been trying to tell him. He found a secluded bench in a dimly lit park, tucked away behind a thicket of overgrown shrubs. He pulled out the journal, its worn pages whispering secrets. He flipped through the familiar handwriting, the elegant loops and slants of his grandfather's script. He dismissed it as eccentric ramblings before, but now every word was imbued with a chilling significance. He found the page his grandfather had pointed him to, the one with the cryptic drawing of the key. Beneath it, in faded ink, were more words. "The keeper of the gateway," he read aloud, his voice barely a whisper in the quiet park. Not a lock but a path. Not a door but a secret. They seek the story. They seek the story behind the story. And they will stop at nothing. His brow furrowed. What did the story behind the story mean? And keeper of the gateway? He looked at the key in his palm, its intricate design suddenly more profound, less like a simple tool. He turned more pages, his eyes scanning for clues. There were entries detailing strange encounters, hushed conversations, warnings about the order and the shadows. Names he didn't recognize, places he'd never heard of. But then he saw a name that made him freeze. Eleanor Vance. It was written several times, always with a sense of urgency, sometimes fear. Eleanor Vance. The woman who had left a message on his answering machine, the one who had disappeared. His grandfather knew her, or knew of her. Was she connected to this order or shadows? Was she a friend, an enemy, or another victim? He continued reading, the words blurring as his eyes darted from line to line. There were references to ancient texts, forgotten languages, symbols Michael didn't understand. But one passage stood out, chilling him to the bone. They believe the key is merely a tool to find the gateway. But the gateway is not a place. It is a state of being. And the key is merely a mirror. It shows the path, but it does not open it. Only the keeper can truly open the gateway, and the keeper must decide if humanity is worthy of what lies beyond. What did that even mean? A mirror? A state of being? And humanity worthy? This wasn't about some hidden treasure or a secret society's power play. This sounded almost philosophical, spiritual even, but the danger felt very real, very physical. He flipped to the very last page, a single entry dated just a few days before his grandfather's death. They are closer than ever. My time is short. The boy, Michael, he must understand. The key chose him. The bloodline is strong. He is the last keeper. He must not let them have the story. He must protect it. The truth will shatter their world. And ours. Michael felt a cold dread spread through him. He was the last keeper? The key chose him? This was insane. He wasn't special. He was a librarian for crying out loud. He curated stories, he didn't live them. And what truth could shatter entire worlds? He looked at the key again, holding it up to the dim park light. It pulsed faintly, or perhaps it was just his imagination, a trick of the light, a reflection of his own racing mind. He closed his hand around it, the metal warm now, almost alive. He heard a distant siren, a wail that seemed to slice through the quiet night. Paranoia surged. Was it for him? Was it a coincidence? He couldn't risk it. He shoved the journal back into his satchel, stood up, and melted back into the shadows. He needed to get out of the city, at least for a while. He had a small rustic cabin, inherited from his other grandfather, deep in the woods several hours' drive away. It was isolated, no internet, barely any cell service. It was a place he went to escape when life got too loud. Now it was his only refuge. He walked for what felt like miles, avoiding main roads, sticking to side streets and darkened alleys. He knew the city's arteries and veins, its back doors and forgotten corners. He eventually made it to a bus station, a grimy, bustling hub of late-night travel. He paid cash for a ticket to a small town about an hour's drive from his cabin, choosing a route that was indirect, hoping to throw off any potential tail. As he sat on the bus, staring out at the passing streetlights, his mind replayed his grandfather's words. The key chose him. The bloodline is strong. He is the last keeper. He was a part of something ancient, something dangerous, something that stretched back through generations, a legacy he never knew he had. He remembered the old stories his grandfather used to tell him as a child, tales of hidden artifacts, secret societies, and guardians who protected forgotten knowledge. He'd always thought they were just bedtime stories, fantastical creations of an imaginative old man. Now he realized they might have been lessons, warnings. He pulled the journal out again, flipping to the first page. There was a dedication, one he'd never really paid attention to before. To my son and his son, the keepers of the unseen. May you guard the truth with your life. A profound sense of responsibility, heavy and terrifying, settled over him. His quiet life was irrevocably over. He was now a player in an ancient, dangerous game, and he was the last keeper, the target. He had the key, he had the journal, and he had a rapidly growing list of questions. But one thing was clear. He was no longer just running from something. He was running with something. And whatever the story was, whatever the gateway truly meant, he had to protect it. For his grandfather, for Eleanor Vance, and perhaps for humanity itself. The bus rumbled on, carrying him further into the unknown, further into a destiny he never asked for, but one he was now bound to fulfill. Hours later, the bus finally groaned to a halt, the hiss of its air brakes cutting through the late afternoon quiet. Michael stepped onto the cracked asphalt of what appeared to be the only road leading into a small, forgotten town. A faded sign, leaning precariously on a weathered post, declared it Oakhaven. The name itself whispered of forgotten things, of history slowly decaying under the weight of time. Oakhaven was a study in stillness. Old Victorian houses, their paint peeling like sunburnt skin, lined narrow, winding streets. Ancient oak trees, their branches gnarled and thick with moss, cast long, distorted shadows that danced with the setting sun. There were no bustling shops, no vibrant cafes, just a general store with a single flickering neon sign, and a gas station that looked like it hadn't seen a customer in a decade. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else Michael couldn't quite place. A faint metallic tang like old iron. He felt an immediate sense of unease, a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, as if the very stones of the town were watching him. He pulled out the crumpled note from his grandfather's journal. Scrawled in the familiar, shaky hand was an address. 14 Elm Street, the Old Mill Bookshop. A bookshop in a town this desolate? It seemed an unlikely beacon in the gloom. Yet, his grandfather had never been one for frivolous details. Every word, every cryptic hint, had always led somewhere significant. Navigating the silent streets, Michael kept his senses heightened. Every creak of a floorboard from a passing house, every rustle of leaves in the wind, sounded amplified. He saw no one, yet the feeling of being observed persisted, a phantom gaze that seemed to follow his every step. He passed a deserted park, its swing set swaying rhythmically in the breeze, an unsettling tableau in the fading light. Finally, he spotted it. Tucked away on a quiet corner, Nestled between a defunct bakery and a boarded-up general store, stood a two-story building that looked like it had been there since Oakhaven's inception. A hand-painted sign, barely legible, read the Old Mill Bookshop. The windows were grimy, obscured by layers of dust and stacks of ancient-looking tomes. A single flickering gas lamp inside cast a warm, inviting glow that seemed utterly out of place in the otherwise somber street. Taking a deep breath, Michael pushed open the heavy wooden door. A tiny bell above jingled faintly, and the air inside was thick with the comforting, musty scent of old paper, leather, and something else, a hint of lavender and cloves. The shop was a labyrinth of towering bookshelves, overflowing with books of every size and age. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light filtering through the grimy windows. "Can I help you, dear?" A voice, surprisingly clear and sharp, cut through the quiet. An elderly woman emerged from behind a towering stack of encyclopedias. She was small and slender, with a cascade of silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her eyes, though framed by a network of wrinkles, were startlingly blue and intensely observant, missing nothing. She wore a simple dark dress and a delicate silver locket around her neck. "I'm looking for someone," Michael began, feeling a strange mix of apprehension and hope. "My grandfather, Arthur Vance. He mentioned this place." The woman's bright blue eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. "Arthur, you say? It's been a long time since Arthur graced these shelves." She walked slowly towards him, her gaze unwavering. "And who might you be, young man, to be asking after Arthur Vance?" "I'm Michael, his grandson." He reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the cool metal of the key. He left me something. Something important." He hesitated, then decided to take a small risk. He said if I ever found myself in Oakhaven seeking answers, I should mention the keeper of the lost words. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the woman's lips. Lost words indeed. Arthur always did have a flair for the dramatic. "Come, Michael. You look like you've seen a ghost, or perhaps been chased by one." She gestured towards a small, cluttered desk tucked away in a corner, surrounded by more books and an ancient-looking teapot. "My name is Clara Jenkins, and yes, I was a dear friend of your grandfather, and of Eleanor Vance for that matter." Michael felt a surge of relief, quickly followed by a fresh wave of questions. "You knew Eleanor? The Eleanor Vance?" Clara nodded, pouring 2 cups of steaming herbal tea. "A remarkable woman, fiercely intelligent, and utterly dedicated to her cause. Just like your grandfather. They were quite a pair, those two, always delving into something profound, something dangerous." She pushed a cup towards him. "Drink. You'll need your wits about you, young Michael. Oakhaven isn't as quiet as it seems, and neither is the world your grandfather pulled you into." "What do you mean?" Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What exactly did he pull me into? And what is the circle?" Clara took a slow sip of her tea, her gaze distant for a moment, as if sifting through decades of memories. "The Circle," she began, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "is an ancient organization, not a secret society in the way most people imagine with cloaks and rituals. No, they are far more insidious. They are the gatekeepers, the censors, the ones who decide what humanity is allowed to know, and what must remain hidden." She leaned forward, her blue eyes piercing Michael's. "For centuries they have sought to control information, to shape history, to manipulate the very fabric of human understanding. They believe knowledge is power, and that power must be concentrated in their hands, for the greater good, of course. They've suppressed technologies, rewritten historical events, even orchestrated wars to achieve their aims." "But why?" Michael asked, struggling to comprehend the scale of such an organization. "Because they fear chaos," Clara replied, a hint of sadness in her voice. "They fear humanity's capacity for destruction, for misunderstanding, for misusing profound truths. They believe they are preventing catastrophe by keeping certain keys locked away. Your grandfather and Eleanor, they saw it differently. They believed that true understanding, even with its risks, was the only path to genuine progress. They sought to unlock what the Circle had hidden." "And the key?" Michael asked, his hand instinctively going to his pocket. "The one my grandfather gave me? What does it unlock?" Clara's gaze fixed on his pocket, a knowing look in her eyes. "That key, Michael, is not for a physical lock, not in the way you might imagine. Oakhaven itself, you see, has a hidden history, It was founded by a collective of master craftsmen and scholars centuries ago, during a time when much of the world was consumed by ignorance and superstition. They built a grand repository here, a place to safeguard knowledge, to preserve truths that would otherwise be lost. A library? Clara shook her head. More than that. A vault. A conceptual vault, if you will. The greatest minds of their era contributed to its design, creating a system so intricate, so profoundly interconnected, that it became known as the Master Lock. It doesn't secure a door, Michael. Secures access. Access to a vast network of hidden chambers, forgotten texts, suppressed technologies, and even a form of energy that could reshape the world. Michael felt a chill run down his spine. So my key, it opens this master lock? It gives access to all of that. It is a key, Clara corrected, her voice grave. Not necessarily the key. Legend says there were several, each designed to unlock a different aspect, a different layer of the master lock's security. Your grandfather believed yours was the primary key, the one that could begin to unravel the entire system. It doesn't just open a door, it reveals the mechanisms, the connections, the truth behind the hidden world. She paused, her eyes scanning the dusty shelves, then lingering on the street outside the window. The Circle has been searching for these keys for centuries. They want to find them, not to open the master lock, but to destroy them, to ensure that no one ever gains access to what they have so carefully suppressed. They know about Oakhaven, of course. They always have. This town is a constant battlefield, fought not with swords but with secrets. Suddenly, Clara's eyes snapped back to Michael, her expression hardening. Which means, Michael, you are not safe here. Not anymore. Not since you stepped off that bus. A faint, almost imperceptible shadow flickered past the shop window. It was gone in an instant, but Clara had seen it. Her hand shot out, grasping Michael's arm with surprising strength. They know you're here. They've been watching Oakhaven, waiting for any sign of a new keeper. Who? Michael asked, his heart beginning to pound. The Circle's enforcers, Clara hissed, her voice tight with urgency. They are everywhere. They are relentless. You need to leave. Now. She pulled a small, intricately folded piece of parchment from beneath her desk, its edges brittle with age. Take this. It's a map, hidden within a riddle. Your grandfather left it here for you should you ever need it. It leads to the next step, to someone who can help you understand more about the master lock and how your key functions. A heavy thud echoed from the front of the shop, as if something large had been dropped against the wooden door. The faint jingling of the bell sounded again, but this time it was sharp, insistent, not the gentle chime from before. Go, Clara urged, pushing him towards a narrow, barely visible door hidden behind a revolving bookshelf. Through here. It's an old service passage. It will lead you out to the alley behind the shop. Don't stop. Don't look back. And whatever you do, Michael, protect that key. It is more than just metal. It is hope. It is truth. Another louder bang rattled the front door, followed by the sound of splintering wood. The gas lamp flickered wildly, casting grotesque shadows that danced like hungry ghosts. Michael didn't hesitate. He grabbed the parchment, tucked the key securely into his pocket, and plunged into the darkness of the hidden passage, the scent of old paper and fear filling his lungs. Behind him, he heard Clara's voice, surprisingly strong, shouting at someone, followed by a crash. He knew he couldn't help her now. His only chance was to keep moving, to find the next clue, to somehow unlock the truth before the Circle locked it away forever. The passage was dark, narrow, and utterly disorienting, but the sound of heavy footsteps and angry shouts growing louder behind him spurred him onward, each desperate step carrying him further into the heart of a war he was only just beginning to understand. The passage was a labyrinth of cold, damp stone, twisting and turning with no apparent logic. Each desperate step Michael took echoed back, amplifying the frantic thumping of his own heart. The air grew heavy with the scent of mildew and forgotten earth, and the oppressive darkness pressed in from all sides. He could hear their shouts, closer now, a chorus of guttural commands and the heavy thud of boots on stone. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but the sheer instinct for survival propelled him forward. He ran, his hands scraping against rough-hewn walls, his breath ragged in his chest. The passage seemed to narrow and widen erratically, sometimes forcing him to squeeze through tight crevices, other times opening into small, claustrophobic chambers that offered no discernible exit. He remembered David's words, the chilling revelation of a war, and the immediate, visceral understanding that he, Michael, was now squarely in its crosshairs. The key, heavy and cold in his pocket, felt less like a gift and more like a brand. A sudden sharp turn brought him to what felt like a dead end. A solid slab of ancient rock, seamless and unyielding, blocked his path. Despair, cold and sharp, pierced through him. He was trapped. The shouts behind him were almost upon him now, the urgency in their voices clear even if the words were indistinct. He pressed his palms against the cold stone, searching for any give, any crack, anything. His fingers, trembling, brushed against a faint indentation near what might have been a seam, a barely visible line running vertically down the rock face. It was too perfect, too straight to be natural. He pushed, pulled, frantically searched for a hidden lever, a switch. Nothing. The stone remained stubbornly immobile. Then a thought sparked in his mind, a desperate gamble born of utter desperation. The key. David had said it opened any lock. Was this a lock? A metaphorical one, perhaps, but a barrier nonetheless. He fumbled in his pocket, his fingers closing around the ornate, cold metal. He held it up, its intricate design catching a sliver of ambient light from somewhere far behind him. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the tip of the key against the faint indentation. It wasn't a keyhole, not in the traditional sense. It was just a small, almost imperceptible groove. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a low, grinding rumble started deep within the earth, a sound that vibrated through the very stones beneath his feet. The massive slab of rock began to slide inward, then to the side, revealing a new, even darker opening. He didn't hesitate. He plunged into the newly revealed passage just as the first figures rounded the corner behind him, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like angry eyes. He heard a frustrated roar, then a volley of shouted commands. The grinding sound of the stone door closing behind him was deafening, sealing him once more in oppressive darkness. He leaned against the rough wall, gasping for air, his muscles screaming in protest. He was safe for now, but where was here? This new passage was different. It felt older, forgotten, less like a functional escape route and more like a buried secret. The air was still and heavy, carrying a faint, musty scent of parchment and aged wood. He moved cautiously, his hands outstretched, navigating the uneven floor. He found a wall, and then another, realizing he had entered a small rectangular chamber rather than a continuous tunnel. His hand brushed against something cold and metallic, then something rough and fibrous. He fumbled for his phone, the screen illuminating a small, forgotten room. Dust motes danced in the beam of light, revealing shelves lining the walls, laden with ancient-looking scrolls, leather-bound books, and peculiar artifacts he couldn't identify. A sturdy wooden desk stood in the center, a single tarnished oil lamp sitting atop it, along with a stack of handwritten journals. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was a sanctuary, a library, a study. Someone had lived here, worked here, perhaps for years in secret. He stepped further in, his fascination momentarily overriding his fear. The air wasn't just musty. It hummed with a strange, almost electric energy, a sense of profound history. He picked up one of the journals from the desk. Its leather cover was cracked and worn, its pages yellowed with age. The script inside was elegant, precise, and immediately legible. It was English, but with an archaic flair that suggested a writer from a bygone era. He began to read, his eyes scanning the faded ink, his heart pounding a different rhythm now, one of discovery, not just fear. The journal didn't have a title, nor an author's name, at least not on the first few pages he flipped through. But the entries were dated, stretching back decades, even centuries it seemed. The initial entries spoke of the Great Order, a clandestine society dedicated to preserving the balance. They spoke of the Weavers, a rival faction driven by a desire to unravel the threads of destiny and reshape the world to their own design. Michael's mind reeled. This was David's war. He read about the Key of Ethelred, a relic of immense power, capable of unlocking not just physical barriers, but also hidden knowledge, forgotten pathways, and even the veils of perception. It was described as a tool of immense potential, a double-edged sword that could either safeguard or destroy. The journal entries grew increasingly urgent over time, detailing skirmishes, betrayals, and the constant struggle to keep the key out of the hands of the Weavers. One entry, dated roughly 70 years ago, caught his eye. It spoke of a failed attempt to secure the key, leading to its dispersal into the mundane world for safekeeping. The author lamented the necessity, fearing that the key, once lost to common sight, might never be found again by those who understood its true purpose. But there was a glimmer of hope. A bloodline, carefully cultivated, would one day be drawn to its power, a natural resonance that would guide it back to its rightful protectors. Michael's breath hitched. A bloodline? Was he part of this? His family had never spoken of anything like this. He was just Michael, an ordinary guy who worked a desk job. Yet here he was holding the key, hunted by shadowy figures, reading about ancient wars and bloodlines. He flipped forward, desperately searching for something more recent, something that could connect him directly to this unfolding nightmare. He found entries detailing the slow, insidious infiltration of the Weavers into various institutions, their growing influence, and the dwindling numbers of the Great Order. The author, clearly a senior member, expressed profound despair at the state of their world. Then, a name appeared repeatedly in the later entries: Daniel. Daniel was described as a brilliant but rogue member of the Great Order, who believed the old ways were failing. He argued for a more aggressive approach, a preemptive strike against the Weavers. The journal detailed Daniel's increasingly radical views, his eventual expulsion, and the fear that he might try to acquire the key for his own purposes, believing he alone had the vision to wield its power correctly. Michael paused, a chilling thought blooming in his mind. Daniel. David had mentioned a Daniel. Was it the same person? The journal spoke of Daniel's charisma, his ability to sway others, and his unwavering belief in his own righteousness. It painted a picture of a man who saw himself as a savior, even if it meant tearing down the world to rebuild it. He continued reading, the words blurring as the implications sank in. The author of the journal, a man named Arthur, had dedicated his life to protecting the key and upholding the tenets of the Great Order. His final entries were filled with a sense of impending doom, a premonition of a final confrontation. The last entry was dated just over a year ago. It simply read, "They are coming. The end of an era. May the bloodline find its way." Michael closed the journal slowly, his mind a tempest of questions. Arthur, David, Daniel, the Great Order, the Weavers, the key, and now a bloodline. It was all impossibly complex, terrifyingly real. He looked around the small, dusty chamber. This was Arthur's sanctuary, his final stand, perhaps. The shelves of scrolls and books were a testament to centuries of knowledge, a desperate attempt to preserve something vital. He noticed a small, intricately carved wooden box on a lower shelf, almost hidden behind a stack of maps. He reached for it, his fingers brushing against the smooth, cool wood. It felt ancient, heavy. He lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single silver locket. It was simple, elegant, completely unadorned. He picked it up. It was cold, but something about it felt familiar. He instinctively pressed the clasp. It opened with a soft click, revealing two miniature portraits. One was a stern-looking man with kind eyes, clearly Arthur. The other was a woman, her face gentle, her smile warm. And Michael knew her. He knew her from old photographs, from faded memories. It was his grandmother. The locket slipped from his stunned fingers, clattering onto the desk. His grandmother. This wasn't just some ancient war. This was his war. He wasn't just an accidental player. He was a descendant, a part of the very bloodline Arthur had written about. He had been drawn to the key not by chance, but by destiny. The weight of it all pressed down on him, a crushing realization of a legacy he never knew existed, a responsibility he was utterly unprepared for. A sudden sharp crack echoed from the stone wall behind the shelves, followed by a faint scraping sound. The sound wasn't coming from the passage he had just escaped, but from somewhere deeper within the structure. A sound like stone grinding on stone, growing louder, closer. He wasn't alone in this hidden chamber. A new threat, perhaps even more ancient and insidious, was stirring. He had stumbled into a secret vault, and something was trying to get in or perhaps out. The grinding intensified, a monstrous sound that vibrated through David's very bones, rattling the dust from the ancient stone. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical presence, a slow, inexorable force bearing down on him. He scrambled backward, his heart hammering against his ribs, his breath catching in his throat. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and acrid, like ozone after a lightning strike. He shone his phone's flashlight frantically around the vault, searching for any escape, any hiding place. The walls were solid, seamless stone, closing him in. The sound was coming from the far end of the chamber, where the walls seemed to ripple, as if the very stone was flexing. A hairline crack, barely discernible at first, snaked its way across the surface, widening with agonizing slowness. It wasn't a crack, he realized with a jolt of terror. It was a seam. A massive, perfectly fitted stone door was opening, but it wasn't opening inward. It was sliding outward into an unseen recess, revealing a gap that seemed to breathe cold, stale air. The grinding roar reached a crescendo, then suddenly, with a final shuddering groan, it ceased. Absolute silence descended, heavier and more terrifying than the noise had been. David stood frozen, his flashlight beam trembling. The gap in the wall was now wide enough for a person to squeeze through, revealing not another chamber, but a swirling vortex of shadow, deeper and more profound than anything light could penetrate. It was like staring into a void, and from that void, a faint rhythmic pulse began to emanate, too low to be heard, but intensely felt, a pressure on his eardrums, a thrumming in his chest. Driven by a primal fear, but also an insatiable curiosity, David forced himself to move. He couldn't stay here trapped. He had to understand what this was. He crept towards the opening, his flashlight beam piercing the gloom. The void wasn't empty. It was filled with a colossal, intricate mechanism, ancient beyond belief, made of some dark, polished metal that absorbed the light. Gears the size of wagon wheels, pistons thicker than tree trunks, and countless smaller, whirring components moved with fluid, silent precision, powered by some unknown energy source. It was a machine vast and complex, and it was alive with purpose. And at its very center, suspended within a shimmering field of energy, was something that made David's blood run cold. It was a crystalline structure, multifaceted and glowing with an internal violet light. It pulsed in sync with the rhythmic thrumming he felt, radiating an aura of immense power. It looked like a heart, the heart of this ancient machine. His gaze dropped to the floor directly beneath the opening. There, etched into the stone, was a series of symbols he hadn't noticed before, partially obscured by centuries of dust. He knelt, brushing away the grime, revealing intricate glyphs that spiraled around a central image. The image was unmistakable. It was a key, his key, but this depiction was different. It showed the key not merely unlocking a door, but interacting with a much larger, more complex system, depicted as a series of interlocking circles and swirling energies. Below the key symbol, a line of text was carved in an archaic script, one he vaguely recognized from his father's old research notes on obscure historical societies. He dismissed it then as academic esoterica, but now, faced with this impossible machine, the words screamed with new meaning. He painstakingly deciphered them, his finger tracing the cold stone. Asterisk, the key of Ethelred. Not to open a door, but to awaken a path. The heart of Kronos, to bind time, to reveal what is hidden, to reclaim what is lost. He who wields the key shall command the unseen currents, but beware the awakened guardian, for it suffers no trespass. Asterisk. Ethelred. The name echoed in his mind. His father had mentioned it, a legendary figure associated with the founding of the Order of the Unseen Hand, the very society David now suspected was behind all of this. But Heart of Kronos? Bind time? Reveal what is hidden? This wasn't just about unlocking physical doors anymore. This was about something far grander, far more dangerous. The words awakened guardian sent a fresh wave of dread through him. Was the machine itself the guardian? Or was something else lurking within that void? As if in answer to his unspoken question, a low hum began to rise from the depths of the mechanism, distinct from the rhythmic pulse. It grew steadily, a deep, resonant vibration that made the air itself thrum. David's eyes darted back to the crystalline heart. The violet glow intensified, pulsing faster, more aggressively. The intricate gears of the colossal machine began to shift, not merely turning but reconfiguring. Pieces moved, clicked into new positions, the entire structure morphing with a terrifying intelligence. It was preparing for something. He stumbled backward, the phone still clutched in his hand, its light beam dancing wildly. The air grew colder, heavy with a strange static charge. The inscription's warning echoed in his ears. It suffers no trespass. He had stumbled into a forbidden place, woken a sleeping giant. He needed to get out. But where? The stone door he had entered through was still locked, the mechanism activated by his key now silent and inert. The only opening was into the maw of this ancient, reconfiguring machine. As he frantically searched, his gaze fell upon a small, unassuming indentation on the stone directly beside the opening into the machine's chamber. It was shaped perfectly for the end of his key. A new lock. But why would there be a lock here, at the heart of this guardian? Hesitantly, David approached, his hand shaking as he raised the key. The hum from the machine grew into a low growl, the violet light from the crystalline heart flaring. He could feel the pressure building, the air crackling around him. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was his only chance. Either the key would offer a way out, or it would seal his fate. He slid the key into the indentation. It fit with a soft, satisfying click. The moment it engaged, the entire vault shuddered violently. The ominous hum from the machine intensified to a piercing shriek. The massive gears inside the void began to spin at dizzying speeds, their dark metal blurring into a dark cyclone. The crystalline heart pulsed with such ferocity that the violet light cast dancing shadows across the ancient walls, momentarily blinding David. He yanked the key, trying to pull it free, but it was stuck fast. It wasn't just a key. It was a conduit, now channeling something immense, something dangerous from the machine into him. A jolt of pure energy shot through his arm, up his shoulder, and into his very core. He cried out, the pain searing, but it was also something else. A flood of information, images, and understanding that overwhelmed his senses. He saw impossible things. Ancient cities built of light, figures cloaked in shadow whispering secrets across millennia, pathways through time and space. He saw the purpose of the Key of Ethelred, not as a tool for physical entry, but as a device to focus and direct the energies of the heart of Kronos. It was a master control, a conductor for a symphony of reality itself. And then, just as suddenly as the pain and visions began, they ceased. The shriek of the machine died down to a low thrum. The violet light softened, though it still pulsed. The key, still embedded in the stone, seemed to glow faintly. David gasped for breath, his body trembling. He was drenched in sweat, his mind reeling from the impossible download of knowledge. He looked at the key, then at the machine, then back at the inscription. He who wields the key shall command the unseen currents. He hadn't just used the key. He had activated it, perhaps even bound himself to it. But the guardian remained. The vast mechanism, though quieter, was still active, still humming with latent power. He had commanded nothing, only triggered something. He was still trapped. Then he noticed a new change. On the stone wall directly opposite the great opening, where the seamless stone had been before, a faint ethereal glow began to emanate. It wasn't a light from behind. It was the stone itself becoming translucent, shimmering like disturbed water. As he watched, mesmerized, the stone dissolved, not into dust, but into pure light, revealing another passageway. This new passage wasn't dark and ancient like the one he'd come from. It was bathed in a soft, luminescent glow, a pathway that seemed to lead into another dimension entirely. It was an exit, perhaps, but into what? The inscription's final words echoed again. To reveal what is hidden, to reclaim what is lost. Had he just unlocked a hidden pathway, not just a physical door? He looked back at the key, still firmly lodged in the indentation. He couldn't remove it. He was now inextricably linked to this place, to this machine, and to whatever lay beyond this glowing new threshold. He had stepped through the looking glass, and there was no turning back. The key had opened a lock, but it had also opened a door to a reality far stranger and more perilous than he could have ever imagined. The blinding, incandescent glow from the threshold consumed him for a fraction of a second, then vanished as abruptly as it had appeared. Michael stumbled forward, his vision momentarily swimming in residual light. When his eyes finally adjusted, he wasn't in the familiar, sterile confines of the bank vault. He was somewhere else entirely. He stood in a long, curving corridor. The walls, floor, and ceiling were made of a single, seamless, pearlescent gray material that seemed to absorb and emit light simultaneously. There were no visible seams, no junctions, no doors, no windows. Just an endless, smooth expanse that stretched into a soft, indistinct haze in both directions. The air was cool, unnaturally still, and carried a faint, almost imperceptible scent of ozone and something else, something ancient and metallic, like old coins found in forgotten places. The silence was profound, a heavy blanket that muffled even the sound of his own breathing. The key, still clutched tightly in his hand, had ceased its vibrant glow. It felt heavy, inert, though its warmth still lingered. Michael looked back. a desperate hope flickering within him. But there was nothing. The wall behind him was identical to the one in front, a continuous featureless curve. The door he had just stepped through had vanished without a trace. A cold dread began to coil in his stomach. He wasn't just in another room. He was in another place. A place that defied logic, a place that shouldn't exist. He pressed his palm against the smooth, cool surface where the threshold had been, half expecting a hidden panel, a secret catch. Nothing. It was solid, unyielding. He was trapped. Panic began to bubble, a frantic, desperate urge to run, to scream, to find an exit. He took a few tentative steps forward, then a few back, his footsteps eerily silent on the smooth floor. The corridor seemed to stretch on forever, a silent, mocking testament to his predicament, amplifying his growing sense of isolation and helplessness. Then a voice. It wasn't loud, yet it resonated through the entire space, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was calm, measured, with an almost musical cadence, yet it carried an undeniable undercurrent of authority that instantly commanded attention. "Welcome, Michael." Michael froze. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drum in the overwhelming silence. He spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice, but there was no one. The corridor remained empty, pristine, its perfect geometry offering no hiding place. "You have finally activated the key to its true potential," the voice continued, ignoring his frantic search. "You have crossed a significant threshold, not merely a physical barrier, but a conceptual one." Michael swallowed, his throat dry. Who are you? Where am I?" he stammered, his voice sounding thin and reedy in the vast emptiness. His mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation, but every fiber of his being screamed that rationality had been left behind with the glowing doorway. A soft, almost imperceptible chuckle echoed, a sound that seemed to dance on the very air itself. "My identity is of little consequence to you, Michael. Think of me as a guide or perhaps a gatekeeper. As for your location, you stand within what we call the nexus, a space between spaces, a convergence point, a hidden layer of reality that exists just beyond the veil of your understanding." A hidden layer? What does that mean? Michael demanded, trying to sound braver than he felt. His mind reeled. This was beyond anything he could have imagined. This wasn't just a powerful key, it was something supernatural, something that defied every law of physics he had ever known. "It means," the voice explained patiently, its tone unruffled by Michael's growing agitation, "that the world you perceive is but one thread in an intricate tapestry. There are others unseen, unheard, yet undeniably present. Your key, Michael, is not merely a tool for opening mundane locks. It is a master key. It unlocks pathways. It reveals secrets. It grants access to what was previously inaccessible. You hold the power to dismantle the very fabric of perception." "But how did I get it? Why me?" Michael asked, a fresh wave of confusion washing over him. He remembered the cryptic note, the anonymous package, the strange compulsion that had driven him to seek out the safe deposit box. Had it all been a setup? "The key finds its wielder," the voice responded, a hint of something unreadable in its tone. "Or perhaps the wielder finds the key when the time is right. Your journey, Michael, has been observed. Your curiosity, your persistence, your unique circumstances made you a suitable candidate. A necessary one, even." Candidate for what? Michael felt a chill creep down his spine, colder than the air in the corridor. This wasn't random. He was being used, manipulated, drawn into something far grander and more terrifying than his own personal quest. "For understanding," the voice stated simply. "For safeguarding. You have unwittingly become embroiled in a struggle far older and more profound than you can comprehend. There are those who seek to preserve the integrity of these hidden pathways. We call ourselves the keepers. And there are others, the breakers, who seek to dismantle them, to tear down the barriers between worlds, for reasons of power, chaos, or misguided ambition. They believe all doors should be open, regardless of the consequences." Michael's mind struggled to process this torrent of information. Keepers, breakers, dimensional pathways? It sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, yet the impossible reality of his surroundings screamed that it was all terrifyingly true. His personal search for answers had just become a footnote in a cosmic war. "You mean, there are other keys? Other people like me?" he whispered, his gaze sweeping the silent corridor, suddenly feeling even smaller, more insignificant in the face of such vast, unseen forces. Indeed, the voice confirmed. Many keys, many wielders throughout history. Some have used their keys for good, some for ill. Your key specifically is an ancient relic, imbued with a unique resonance. It did not just open the safe deposit box, Michael. It opened you to the truth. It activated a dormant potential within you, a connection to these hidden realities. So I'm part of this now? Michael asked, a sense of resignation beginning to settle over him. He was no longer a man searching for answers. He was a piece on a cosmic chessboard, moved by unseen hands. The weight of his ordinary life seemed to evaporate, replaced by an even greater burden. You stepped through the door, Michael. You chose your path, the voice said, its tone firm, leaving no room for argument. And now you have a role to play. The Nexus is a place of learning, but also of great danger. The breakers are always searching for new keys, new pathways. Your arrival here will not go unnoticed by them for long. They will sense the ripple, the new presence. Danger! Michael's eyes widened, scanning the featureless walls as if expecting an enemy to materialize from the seamless gray. What kind of danger? The kind that seeks to exploit, to corrupt, to destroy, the voice replied, a subtle shift in its timbre, darker now, carrying a chilling implication. The balance is fragile, and the power you now wield, even unknowingly, makes you a target. You are no longer safe in the mundane world, not truly. You are a beacon, Michael, and beacons attract all manner of ships, both friend and foe. Some will seek to guide you, others to extinguish you. Michael felt a surge of adrenaline, mixed with a chilling terror. He had thought the key would solve his problems, unlock his past. Instead, it had thrown him into an entirely new, infinitely more complex and dangerous future. His life, as he knew it, was irrevocably over. What do I do? He asked, his voice barely a whisper, a desperate plea for guidance. How do I get out of here? You cannot simply get out, Michael. Not yet. The voice stated, its authority absolute. Your understanding is incomplete. Your abilities undeveloped. For now you must learn. You must adapt. And you must trust. Trust in the guidance provided, and trust in your own burgeoning connection to this reality. Trust? Trust a disembodied voice in an impossible corridor? Michael scoffed internally, but the gravity of his situation quickly extinguished any defiance. He had no other choice. He was utterly at their mercy, whatever they were. Your first lesson begins now, the voice continued, its tone shifting to one of instruction, a subtle urgency creeping into its measured cadence. The Nexus will present you with challenges, tests of perception, of will, of understanding. You must navigate them. You must find the next threshold, and you must do it quickly. Time here flows differently, but the world outside does not wait. The breakers are already stirring. The next threshold? Where is it? Michael looked around the empty corridor, a profound sense of isolation washing over him. There was nothing, just endless gray, stretching into obscurity. No visible path, no sign of what to do next. It is not a physical door, Michael, but a conceptual one, the voice explained, its final words echoing and fading into the silence. It is a question, a riddle, a pattern. The Nexus itself is a living puzzle. Look closer, not with your eyes but with your mind. The key may have opened this door, but your perception must open the next. As the voice faded entirely, the profound silence returned, thicker and more oppressive than before. Michael was left utterly alone, standing in the endless, curving corridor, the inert key still warm in his hand. He stared at the seamless gray walls, his mind racing, trying to make sense of the impossible. He had sought answers, and he had found them, but they were not the answers he had expected. He was no longer just Michael, a man with a past. He was now a keeper or a pawn in a secret war for reality itself. The key had opened a lock, but it had also locked him into a destiny he could never have foreseen. He was adrift in a sea of unfathomable power and terrifying uncertainty, and the current was pulling him further and further from everything he had ever known. He had to find that next threshold, whatever it was, before the breakers found him. The world outside had become a blur of frantic motion, a relentless pursuit of the unknown. Michael knew the breakers were closing in, their methodical cruelty a chilling presence breathing down his neck. He couldn't afford to stop, couldn't afford to rest. Every shadow seemed to hold a watchful eye, every distant siren a precursor to their arrival. Jessica, her face etched with a fear that mirrored his own, clung to his side, her presence a fragile anchor in the storm of his unraveling reality. They were in a borrowed, nondescript car, hurtling through the anonymity of the interstate, the city lights fading behind them as they sought refuge in the sprawling, forgotten corners of the American landscape. He pulled out the worn notebook his grandfather, David, had always carried, its pages filled with elegant, looping script and strange diagrams that Michael had once dismissed as eccentric doodlings. Now they were his lifeline. He flipped past the entries he had already deciphered, past the coordinates that had led him to the hidden chambers and the encrypted data streams. He needed something new, something that pointed directly to the next threshold, not just another piece of the puzzle but the very gateway itself. "There has to be something," Jessica whispered, her voice tight with exhaustion, peering over his shoulder. "Something we missed." Michael's fingers traced a symbol on one of the pages, a stylized, interlocking set of rings, almost like a fractal. He'd seen it before, subtly embedded in the architecture of the first threshold, pixelated into the background of the second, and even woven into the cryptic message Emily had delivered. He'd thought it was a logo, a signature, but what if it was more? What if it was a key in itself, not for a lock but for a pattern? He remembered Emily's final, hurried words, her gaze distant and worried. "The network is vast, Michael. Don't look for what is hidden. Look for what is everywhere." Everywhere. The interlocking rings. It was too pervasive to be mere branding. It was a fundamental construct. But how could a symbol be a threshold? Suddenly, a memory resurfaced, faint but insistent. A late-night conversation with his grandfather years ago, sparked by a documentary about ancient civilizations. David had spoken about universal constants, about mathematical harmonies that underpinned reality, about how certain patterns were not invented but discovered. He had mentioned a specific sequence, a series of numbers that appeared in everything from the spirals of a seashell to the arrangement of galaxies. Michael had dismissed it as an old man's musings, a tangent into pseudoscience. But now, he frantically searched the notebook again, focusing not on the explicit clues, but on the margins, the doodles, the seemingly irrelevant notes. And there it was, almost lost in a series of calculations. A small, elegant spiral, annotated with a series of numbers that Michael instantly recognized as a variant of the Fibonacci sequence, followed by a seemingly random string of letters and symbols. Below it, in a tiny, almost invisible script, was a single word: harmonics. Harmonics. Universal constants. Emily's everywhere. It clicked into place with a chilling certainty. The key wasn't opening physical locks. It was opening perceptions. It wasn't about finding hidden places, but about seeing the hidden order in plain sight. The threshold wasn't a location but a frequency, a resonance. "Jessica," Michael said, his voice hushed. "The breakers, they're not just destroying data or structures. They're trying to disrupt the pattern. They're trying to break the harmonics." Jessica looked at him, her eyes wide. "What does that mean, Michael? What pattern?" "The pattern of the universe, I think," he replied, the words feeling audacious, impossible, yet utterly true. "My grandfather, he wasn't just an inventor. He was a guardian of this underlying order. It's not an object. It's a way of perceiving the order, of tuning into it. And the thresholds are points of heightened resonance, where the pattern becomes clearer, where the veil is thinnest. The string of letters and symbols under the spiral. It wasn't a password. It was a frequency. He had to find a way to interpret it. He needed a device, something that could process complex data, something portable and powerful. His laptop was back in his apartment, likely already compromised. His phone was a tracking beacon. He needed something anonymous, untraceable. As if on cue, a notification flashed on the car's infotainment system. A message from an unknown sender. His heart leaped into his throat, expecting the breakers. But the message was short, cryptic, and oddly familiar. The old ways are often the new solutions. Seek the echo. It was Emily. She was still out there, still guiding him, her ethereal presence a distant beacon. The old ways, the echo. Michael's mind raced. Old ways. What did that mean in the context of tuning into universal harmonics? Ancient instruments? Forgotten technologies? Then he remembered another of David's hobbies: antique radios. His grandfather had a collection of vintage shortwave radios, each one meticulously restored, capable of picking up signals from across the globe, from across time it seemed. David used to spend hours in his study, a pair of headphones clamped to his ears, listening to static and distant voices, calling it his cosmic meditation. Michael knew where David kept his most prized possession: a massive ornate tube radio from the 1940s, hidden in a dusty, forgotten storage unit his grandfather rented across town. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only lead he had. "We're going back," Michael announced, making a sharp turn onto an exit ramp. Jessica gasped. "Back? Michael, they'll be waiting for us." "Not for this," he said, his voice firm, a new resolve hardening his features. "Not for what I'm looking for. This isn't about a physical location they can track. It's about a frequency, a signal, an echo. And to find it, I need an antenna to the past." The drive back was a blur of heightened senses. Every car that passed them felt like a threat, every shadow a lurking danger. They made it to the storage facility just before dawn, the air still heavy with the chill of the night. Michael fumbled with the lock, his hands shaking, not from fear, but from the immense gravity of what he was about to attempt. Inside, the unit was a time capsule of David's life. Forgotten furniture, boxes of books, and in the very back, under a heavy canvas tarp, sat the imposing silhouette of the antique radio. It was a behemoth of polished wood and gleaming dials, a relic from an age when tuning into the world meant turning a knob and listening for the faint whisper of distant signals. He plugged it in, the old tubes glowing with a soft orange warmth as the device hummed to life. The static filled the small space, a white noise that felt both chaotic and strangely comforting. He brought out his grandfather's notebook again, the string of letters and symbols now seeming less random. It wasn't a frequency in hertz, he realized, but a sequence, a pattern of frequencies, a complex modulation. Michael began to carefully manipulate the dials, tuning the radio with an almost ritualistic precision, guided by the cryptic sequence from the notebook. He wasn't looking for a human voice or a music station. He was listening for the echo. Jessica watched him, her breath held, the silence of the storage unit broken only by the crackle and hiss of the ancient machine. He turned one dial, then another, the static shifting, morphing. He adjusted the fine-tuning knob, his ear pressed close to the speaker, trying to discern any change, any deviation from the random noise. The sequence in the notebook was long, intricate, demanding perfect execution. He repeated it, dial by dial, letter by letter, symbol by symbol, translating the abstract into tangible adjustments. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he reached the end of the sequence. For a moment, nothing happened, just the same hissing static. Despair began to creep in. Had he been wrong? Was this another dead end? Then a subtle shift. The static didn't disappear, but it changed. It coalesced, forming a low, resonant hum beneath the crackle, a sound that vibrated deep in his chest. It was a pure tone, unwavering and profound, like the deepest note of a cosmic chord. It wasn't a broadcast, it was a presence. The interlocking rings, the fractal symbol, shimmered in his mind's eye. He was listening to the universe's own heartbeat, the fundamental frequency of reality itself. And then, woven into that deep hum, a voice, not speaking words but conveying pure information, a cascade of understanding that flooded his mind. It wasn't a language he knew, yet he understood it perfectly. It was a history, a purpose, a warning. The architects weren't just building thresholds. They were maintaining the very fabric of reality, a delicate balance of information and energy that held the universe together. And the breakers, they weren't just destroying knowledge. They were trying to unravel existence itself, to return everything to a state of absolute chaos, a primordial void. The key wasn't just about unlocking doors, Michael realized with a horrifying clarity. It was about holding the universe together. It was about preserving the pattern, the harmonics, against those who sought to shatter it. He was adrift in a sea of unfathomable power and terrifying uncertainty, and the current was pulling him further and further from everything he had ever known. He had to find that next threshold, whatever it was, before the breakers found him. The tremor in his hands wouldn't stop. He stared at the key, lying innocently on his palm, a simple piece of ornate metal that had shattered his understanding of reality. He'd felt the world bend, twist, and reform around him, not just once, but with increasing intensity. The last experience had been a full-blown assault on his senses, a glimpse behind the curtain of existence that had left him gasping for air, clutching at the remnants of his sanity. He needed to talk to Jessica. She was the only one who had even a fraction of an idea of what he was going through, the only one who had felt the subtle ripples of the key's power. He called her, his voice a strained whisper when she finally answered. "Michael, are you okay? I've been worried sick. I tried calling you back. Jessica, I don't know if I'm okay," he admitted, the words tumbling out. It happened again. Worse this time. Much, much worse. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a vision, a shifting, like the world itself was a fragile illusion. There was a silence on the other end, heavy with unspoken dread. Then her voice, soft but firm. "Where are you? Are you safe?" "For now. I'm at an old, abandoned warehouse I found. It's off the grid, but I don't think anywhere is safe anymore. I think they're closer than ever." "Who, Michael?" "The breakers." "Yes, I can feel it, like a cold draft on the back of my neck, even when there's no wind. They're hunting me, but I also feel something else. This pull, this current. It's like the key is trying to drag me somewhere, show me something. It keeps talking about thresholds." Jessica took a deep breath. "Thresholds? That's what you said before. What did you mean, a vision? What did you see?" Michael struggled to articulate the ineffable. It was like the fabric of reality was tearing. "I saw possibilities, other versions of moments, and then a sense of everything being connected, but not in a way we understand. Like the universe is a single vast, intricate mechanism, and the key is a master switch." "A master switch," Jessica repeated, her voice thoughtful. "That aligns with some of the obscure texts I've been looking at, the ones about unseen architecture and prime movers. They speak of certain artifacts, not just keys but objects that could tune reality. Not alter it, but allow one to perceive its deeper structure." "Perceive its deeper structure," Michael mused, the idea both terrifying and exhilarating. "So these thresholds aren't just physical doors, are they? They're layers of perception, layers of reality itself." "Perhaps," Jessica said. "The texts hint that these prime movers weren't meant to be used lightly. They could unravel the mind as easily as they could reveal truth. They were often guarded by those who feared the truth, or those who sought to control it. The breakers," Michael finished. "They want to keep us blind, keep us in the illusion. Or they want to be the only ones who see," Jessica countered, a shiver in her voice. "Imagine the power, Michael, to perceive the true structure of reality, to understand its underlying code. You wouldn't just be able to open any lock, you'd be able to rewrite the rules of existence." The thought sent a jolt through Michael. Rewrite the rules? He was barely clinging to his own sanity. But how do I find this next threshold? How do I even know what I'm looking for? "The text mentioned that the artifacts often contain their own instructions," Jessica said, her voice growing more animated, her academic instincts kicking in despite the danger. "Hidden engravings, subtle patterns, even a resonance that only those attuned to it could perceive. Have you examined the key closely? Not just for its beauty, but for any hidden marks?" Michael looked down at the key again. He'd admired its intricate design, the twisting vines and stylized leaves of its bow, the elegant fluting of its shaft. But he'd never looked for instructions. He turned it over and over in his hand, feeling for a seam, a catch, anything. He ran his fingers along the cold metal, tracing the patterns. Suddenly, his thumb brushed against a raised ridge on the inner curve of the bow, almost imperceptible amidst the ornamentation. It felt like a tiny, deliberate imperfection. He brought it closer to his eyes, squinting in the dim light. It wasn't an imperfection. It was a symbol, a tiny, almost microscopic engraving, nestled perfectly within the swirling design. It was a complex geometric pattern, a series of interlocking circles and lines that seemed to fold in on themselves. It looked like nothing he had ever seen. "I found something," he breathed, excitement warring with trepidation. "A symbol, on the key itself. It's incredibly small, almost hidden. Can you describe it?" Jessica urged. He did his best, tracing the pattern with his finger. "It's like a nested fractal, circles within circles, connected by lines that don't seem to follow Euclidean geometry. It's impossible, almost. Impossible geometry," Jessica murmured. "Michael, I think I've seen something similar. In some of the older architectural plans I studied for my thesis, the ones that were dismissed as fantasy or artistic license. There was a specific set of blueprints for a forgotten wing of the old city archives, built over a century ago. It was never fully constructed, or so they said. The architect was obsessed with something called non-Euclidean space and dimensional folding. The city archives? Michael felt a flicker of hope. You think this symbol connects to that? It's a long shot, but the description, those plans had a recurring motif of these impossible geometric patterns, especially around the proposed entrance to the unbuilt Observatory of Inner Space. It was supposed to be a place to perceive things beyond the mundane, a place to cross thresholds. The words hit Michael with the force of a physical blow. Observatory of Inner Space. Thresholds. This couldn't be a coincidence. I can try to access the old blueprints, see if I can find a match for your symbol, Jessica offered. But it would mean going into the academic network, potentially exposing myself. No, Jessica, it's too risky for you, Michael said immediately. If the breakers are as close as I think, they'll be monitoring everything. Every unusual data request, every query. Then what do we do? She asked, a note of fear creeping into her voice. We can't just sit here. And you can't go after this alone. You need someone watching your back, someone to help you interpret what you find. He knew she was right. He couldn't leave her out of this, not when she was already so deeply entwined. Okay, but we need a plan, a way to bypass their surveillance. Think, is there any other way to access those plans? An old physical copy? A contact? There's Professor Davies, Jessica said slowly. He was my thesis advisor. He's retired now, but he was fascinated by my work on impossible architecture. He might have physical copies of those plans. He had a private collection of rare academic documents, away from the university's digital systems. He lives pretty isolated, out in the countryside. Professor Davies, Michael repeated, a new target solidifying in his mind. That's our next threshold. He might not know it, but he holds a piece of the puzzle. Just as he finished the sentence, he heard it. A faint, almost subliminal hum, vibrating through the concrete floor of the warehouse. It wasn't a car, not an engine. It was something else. A resonance. A cold metallic scent seemed to seep into the air. Jessica, I have to go. Now, Michael whispered, his voice urgent. They're here. I can feel it. Be careful, Michael. Call me as soon as you can. He hung up, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The hum intensified, growing into a low thrum that vibrated in his teeth. He grabbed his small backpack, stuffing the key deep inside a hidden compartment. He glanced around the cavernous warehouse. There were multiple exits, but he had to choose one quickly. He heard a faint clink from the direction of the main loading bay doors. They were trying to get in. They weren't just observing anymore, they were making their move. He sprinted towards a smaller, lesser-used side door, hidden behind a stack of rusted machinery. He fumbled with the old, stiff lock, his fingers clumsy with adrenaline. It was a standard padlock, but it felt impossibly resistant. Then he remembered the key. The other key. The key that opened any lock. He pulled it out, his hand shaking. This wasn't a threshold moment, not a grand revelation. This was immediate, desperate survival. He inserted the ornate key into the padlock's mechanism. There was no click, no grind of tumblers. Instead, the padlock seemed to simply soften. Its metal parts flowed, shifted, and then dissolved into a fine dust that rained onto the concrete floor. The door swung open silently. Michael didn't hesitate. He burst out into the cool night air, running towards the cover of a dense copse of trees at the edge of the property. He risked a glance back. Silhouetted against the dim lights of the city, a dark, unmarked van was pulling up to the main entrance of the warehouse. Figures cloaked in shadow were emerging from it, moving with a chilling, predatory precision. They had found him, and they were not playing games. He ran, the image of the impossible symbol on the key burned into his mind, the words Observatory of Inner Space, echoing in his ears. Professor Davies. That was the next step. That was the next threshold. But the path to it was now fraught with immediate, deadly peril. He was no longer just a seeker of truth. He was a hunted man, a fugitive carrying a secret that could either unleash unimaginable understanding or tear the world apart. The hum of the breaker's vehicle seemed to follow him, a low, menacing growl. He felt their presence like a physical weight, pressing down on him, trying to crush him, to erase him. But he wouldn't break. He couldn't. Not when the truth, however terrifying, was finally within reach. The key was not just a tool for unlocking doors. It was a beacon, a compass pointing towards a reality far grander and more perilous than he had ever conceived. He had to keep moving, to keep seeking, to keep pushing forward, because turning back was no longer an option. The current was too strong, and he was already too far out at sea. He was going to find Professor Davies. He was going to find those plans. And he was going to understand what that symbol truly meant, even if it meant risking everything, even if it meant facing the full, terrifying might of the breakers and whatever deeper truths they were so desperately trying to hide. The next threshold awaited, and he felt an undeniable, relentless pull towards it. A pull that promised either ultimate revelation or utter annihilation. Hayfaying might of the breakers and whatever deeper truths they were so desperately trying to hide. The next threshold awaited, and he felt an undeniable, relentless pull towards it. A pull that promised either ultimate revelation or utter annihilation. Michael stood at the precipice of understanding, the key now a burning weight in his hand, no longer a mere object but a conduit to a truth too vast to comprehend, yet too vital to ignore. The path led him deeper into the heart of the city, not through its streets and alleys, but through its unseen currents, its hidden frequencies, guided by an intuition that felt less like his own and more like a whisper from the universe itself. He found himself drawn to an unassuming building, a towering monolithic structure of glass and steel that had always blended into the urban tapestry, utterly unremarkable. Yet, as he approached, the key pulsed and the building seemed to shimmer, its mundane facade dissolving to reveal an intricate, almost biological network beneath, a pulsating web of energy and information. This wasn't just a building. It was a nexus, a central node in the breaker's vast, unseen architecture of control. He felt a tremor in the air, a hum that resonated not in his ears, but in the very core of his being. The key vibrated violently, almost leaping from his grasp, and then with a soft click that echoed in the silent space around him, a section of the shimmering wall before him dissolved, revealing an entrance. Not a door but an invitation, a void that promised answers. He stepped inside and the world shifted. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken narratives, with the countless stories of billions of lives, all converging, all meticulously recorded. He was in a vast ethereal chamber, a space that defied physical dimensions. Walls of pure light pulsed with data streams, not numbers or images, but abstract concepts, emotions, memories. It was the collective unconscious, the grand repository of all human experience, meticulously curated. And amidst it all stood figures. Not the grim, suited men he had encountered before, but beings of pure light and shadow, their forms shifting, coalescing, dissolving. They were the true breakers, not merely agents but the architects themselves. They were vast, ancient, and their presence radiated an authority that made the very air crackle with latent power. One of them, a figure whose light was brighter, whose form was more stable, stepped forward. It had no discernible face, yet Michael felt an ancient intelligence gaze upon him. An intelligence that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth and death of stars. "You have come far, Michael," a voice resonated, not from the figure's form, but from within his own mind, a voice that was calm, resonant, and utterly devoid of malice. "Further than any before you. You have truly understood the key." Michael gripped the key tighter. "What is this place? What are you?" "This place," the radiant being replied, its voice rippling through the chamber, "is the loom, and we are the weavers. The key you hold is not for opening locks, Michael. It is for unraveling threads, and ultimately for reweaving them." Michael's mind reeled. Unraveling threads? What threads? The threads of reality, Michael. The stories. Every life, every event, every choice, every perceived reality. It is a thread in a vast, intricate tapestry. A narrative. This universe, your existence, is not a random collection of atoms and forces. It is a story meticulously crafted, constantly unfolding. A story? Michael scoffed, a desperate laugh escaping him. "You mean we're all just characters? Our lives are predetermined." "Not predetermined in the way you understand it," the weaver explained patiently. "More like a grand narrative with countless branching paths, variables within a fixed plot. We are the guardians of this narrative. We ensure its coherence, its stability. We prevent it from unraveling into chaos." "And the key?" Michael asked, his voice barely a whisper, the weight of the implications pressing down on him. The key is a tool of perception, a lens through which one can see the underlying narrative structure. It allows you to perceive the threads, the plot points, the fixed events, and the moments of choice. But more than that, it allows you to touch them, to subtly, or perhaps not so subtly, influence the weave, to become a co-author. Michael stared at the radiant being, a horrifying realization dawning on him. You manipulate us. You control our reality. We guide it, the weaver corrected, for the preservation of all. Imagine, Michael, if every individual possessed the key, if every mind could perceive the threads and attempt to reweave them according to their own desires. The tapestry would tear apart. Reality would dissolve into a cacophony of conflicting narratives, an anarchy of existence. We maintain the illusion of free will within a framework that ensures the story continues, that life, as you know it, can persist. So, the breakers, you break those who try to expose this truth? We break those who threaten the narrative. Another weaver, a darker, more shadowy figure, interjected, its voice like the rustle of ancient parchment. Those who pull too hard at the threads, who attempt to rewrite the fundamental plot points. We restore order. We mend the tears. Michael thought of Sarah, of the subtle manipulations, the whispers, the convenient coincidences that had guided him, both towards and away from the truth. He thought of the constant push and pull, the feeling of being a pawn in a game he hadn't understood. It all made a terrifying, chilling sense. You led me here, Michael accused, his voice gaining strength. You let me find the key. You let me uncover this truth. The radiant weaver shimmered. There are moments in every grand narrative, Michael, when a character is destined to encounter the truth, a point of revelation. You were always meant to find the key to understand the loom. It was written into your story. And now what? Michael demanded. Now that I know, what do you do with me? Do you break me? Do you erase my memory? Do you make me a part of your narrative control? The chamber hummed with an almost palpable silence. The other weavers held still, their forms flickering like distant stars. That choice, Michael, is yours, the radiant weaver finally stated. The key gives you power, yes, but it also gives you a burden. You have seen behind the curtain. You can never unsee it. You can attempt to expose this truth to the world, to tear down the narrative and unleash chaos. Or you can become a guardian like us, understanding the necessity of the illusion. Or you can choose to live within the narrative, knowing the truth but choosing to play your part, to influence the story subtly from within. Michael looked down at the key in his hand. It glowed with a soft, internal light, reflecting the intricate, pulsing patterns on the walls of the loom. He could feel the threads of reality vibrating around him, the lives of billions, the hopes, the fears, the loves, the losses, all part of an immense, beautiful, terrifyingly fragile story. He remembered the feeling of genuine connection, the warmth of Sarah's hand, the quiet joy of a sunrise, the simple pleasure of a shared laugh. Were those moments less real because they were part of a narrative? Or did the narrative give them meaning, context, a stage upon which to unfold? The choice was monumental. To shatter the illusion would be to plunge humanity into an existential crisis, a nihilistic abyss. To join the weavers would be to become part of the very system he had fought against, a keeper of secrets, a silent manipulator. To simply return to his old life, knowing what he knew, would be to live with a constant, gnawing awareness of the world's true nature, a perpetual outsider. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath that felt like it drew from the very essence of the loom itself. He felt the vastness of it all, the intricate dance of cause and effect, the delicate balance between fate and free will. The key didn't just open locks. It opened his mind to the infinite possibilities and the terrifying responsibilities that came with such knowledge. When he opened his eyes, he met the gaze of the radiant weaver, or rather, he met the gaze of the universe it represented. I cannot break the narrative, Michael said, his voice firm, resonating with a newfound clarity and conviction. Not for everyone. The chaos, it would be too great. But I also cannot become one of you to actively control and manipulate. That is not my story. The weaver seemed to nod, a subtle shift in its luminous form. Then what is your story, Michael, now that you hold the key? Michael looked around the loom, at the billions of shimmering threads, the countless lives, the unfolding drama of existence. He held the key up, not as a weapon but as a tool of insight. My story, he declared, is to be a silent reader, to understand the narrative, to appreciate its complexity, its beauty, its flaws. and perhaps to subtly, gently, in the quiet moments offer a different perspective. To inspire, not to control. To plant seeds of awareness, not to tear down the walls. To remind humanity of the power of their own stories, even within the grand narrative. The radiant weaver seemed to expand, its light intensifying, a silent acknowledgement. A profound choice, Michael. To live within the truth, yet respect the illusion. A true weaver of a different kind. Michael felt a profound peace settle over him, mixed with an immense, almost unbearable loneliness. He had found the ultimate truth, and it had set him apart. He was no longer just Michael, the average man seeking answers. He was Michael, the man who knew the universe was a story, and he held the key to its structure. He turned, the shimmering entrance to the loom reappearing before him. He didn't need guidance. He knew his way back. He knew his place. He knew his purpose. As he stepped out of the Nexus building, the mundane facade snapped back into place, the shimmer gone, the hum silenced. The city bustled around him, oblivious, living out its myriad stories. He looked at the faces passing by, each a character, each a plot line, each a universe unto themselves. The key was still in his hand, but it no longer burned. It felt like an extension of his own awareness, a permanent lens. He knew the breakers would be watching him always. He was a variable, a potential wild card, but one who had chosen a path of delicate balance. He walked away, back into the world, a world that was both exactly the same and fundamentally different. He knew the truth, and that truth was that reality was a story, and he was now one of its conscious readers, holding the key that opened not just locks, but the very fabric of existence itself. The mystery was solved, but a new, deeper one had just begun, the mystery of how one lives, truly lives, when you know the entire script. And with that knowledge, Michael knew his own story was far from over. It had merely just begun its most profound, silent, and deeply impactful chapter. He was free, yet bound by the most powerful truth of all. The key to every lock was not a solution, but a beginning. And the universe held its breath, waiting to see what he would do